What we've tried to do with this measure, and I think we've done a really great job at it, is to take history, ancient culture, and then to take modern medicine, and to find that place where we think that genuine therapy should be, not locked up in the medical model per se, and not without any sort of basic guidance and best practice standards. And so I think what we're offering here isn't like a I know it's not a short-term thing. This is like the thing that is needed in order to bring psilocybin-assisted therapy into the Western culture in such a way that it's still community-based and yet it's guided by the science.
PSI2020.org, that's PSI-2020.org. There's a tab on there that I think is called The Measure. And there's a download there, opens up a PDF.
One of the most important things is to really understand what the overall kind of view of the perspective, what the heart and the ultimate message of the initiative is. So getting the messaging right is really important. I don't know if you guys have noticed this, but every time there is some sort of news article on psychedelics and or psilocybin or MDMA or whatever it may be, the headlines are always crazy. They don't accurately reflect really anything. And then you go in and you read it and there's kind of nuanced information. So what you could be doing is knowing what this initiative is about, because what we need is the vote. In addition, we do, as I mentioned earlier, we do need donations. It's not 100% funded yet. We are asking for volunteers. Tom and I travel and speak and share this message a lot. When we go to different cities, like we are here in Salem today, it's nice to have people that can help us out at events. And other things that you can think of?
Yeah, I think that messaging, and so we're trying to develop a comprehensive messaging team. We need to get into the community, and we got to figure out how to do that, whether it's through community events like this. So if you have a venue, or if you know ways to go about that, or if you have a storefront and you want to put a poster up that's educational, things of that nature. If you make posters, let's make a poster. We've got to create, and we kind of alluded to this, we've got to create a narrative that fits today, but takes into account all the wisdom that that's part of that bigger story of psychedelics. They make it intentionally very challenging to do a ballot initiative, but we've got to overcome that. It generally takes a canvasser supervising somebody giving a signature on a piece of paper. And there's a positive side to that, because it's really hard to get signatures. You have to have canvassers on the ground, but those canvassers are agents of change on the ground, talking to people, creating a presence. So that's kind of why we want to pause and really hit the streets full force and really be felt, instead of this kind of like, oh, they're kind of there, but not really. No, we want to hit it hard when we do.
This is the first document of its kind on planet Earth. This is the first campaign to do exactly what we're trying to do on the planet. And like Tom and I shared earlier, we started this about, 4 or 5 years ago, and we took our time, because this movie that you watched this evening is old. Robert Barnhart, the executive producer, is our dear friend, and this is old, so the information is old, and we were waiting for more information to come out so that the science could be, we're getting ready to go into the third phase of FDA studies. We basically, I think we can proudly say as Oregonians, what a privilege to have this document in our hands and the ability to vote on it. There's nothing else to compare to. Now, when in 2020, I think that there'll be a lot of states in this country and a lot of countries on this planet looking at this document.
When you're trying to implement something new into the culture, what happens is that people tend to want to put it in boxes that already exist. So that's our challenge, is that this doesn't fit in a box. We've got to help people understand that we can create something that has its own internal consistency and discipline licensing, oversight, but doesn't fit in these other systems that we are all kind of fed up with, quite honestly.
We're familiar with, we're familiar with the practices of other medicines in Peru and other countries. So we have ancient medicine that we're familiar with. Then we're familiar with the modern medical process. And so it is kind of an interesting thing to be where we are, because this isn't in that box, as Tom says. So people are kind of scratching their heads. I believe both sides want to love this initiative. And I think that how it unfolds here in the next 16 months is really important to bringing everybody to this place where they see this is a really beautiful blend.
It's just this question of incentive, It's like when the incentive is to sell pills, things end up where they end up. And this is trying to right that picture a little bit.
And I think it's important to note too, in terms of the FDA process, the amazing scientists like Tony Bossis and Roland Griffiths and David Nichols, these amazing human beings, they're doing what must be done in order to work within the system, and it takes a lot of money and it takes a lot of time. And so it's not that system isn't going to have its place. People are in hospitals, dying of cancer. They're not necessarily going to be able to come to a service center.
We're trying to avoid commercialization. I think we've addressed that really well in the language. And by commercialization, I mean like psilocybin kind of coming out as cannabis would, being marketed to end users with brands and all that. We want psilocybin products to be neutral. It's just like, this is what it is, and it's not like some competition of branding. And so the language cuts that out. Now, I think that if you're a provider, you should be able to have your website and show what you do and your space and things like that. So that opens up into a marketplace. But we don't want this to be a commercialized product pushing kind of thing.
We're talking about addressing the mental health crisis here in Oregon. Cannabis didn't do that. So the opening could very well be, we need real change for real healing. And as mentioned in the movie, as mentioned by Kevin, how many of us in this room know somebody who's suffering? Somebody
Addictions, alcoholism,
right?
depression.
We all do. So this is a great way to start. We all have friends and family who are suffering. We ourselves may be suffering. And we have as we shared, Oregon is the #1 state in the union for depression. So what we're talking about here is a novel approach to get people healed so that we can reduce our homelessness, so that we can reduce suicide, so that we can reduce depression and increase productivity in our state and be a shining beacon for the rest of this country.
Yeah, a lot of people who have never done psilocybin find their way to the campaign, interestingly. And I think that's because it gets kind of connected to other healthy things, and that's helpful for the narrative, to connect psilocybin to just right living and the environmental issues and all, cross-pollination between movements. There's something happening in the country that's rising up from the grassroots. Obviously, from the top down, there's a lot that's messed up. And we're getting together in rooms like this and talking about change. And people are talking about that in a lot of different ways. And if we can kind of psilocybin is kind of central once people get a sense of it, because it's about your consciousness. It's about real change.
The goal, of course, is to take the work that's being done underground and to bring it above ground, to make it legitimate, and to give the individuals who are doing this and doing it well the opportunity to get licensed and to be able to make a legal living.
It's a standalone license, which is interesting. So this isn't just piggybacking on your previous master's degree or doctorate degree, you'd have to have a standalone piece of intensive training that leads to licensure. And the training will be intensive because it's important. So it opens it up to anyone with the heart and discipline to become a facilitator. And we think that's important.
So we've kind of we've definitely made the language so that anybody, as Tom said, with heart and discipline can do this. But at the same time, there does have to be rigor, because people who are in a psilocybin state are vulnerable and they need to feel safe. And if we look at what's going on in some of the other cultures overseas and stuff with psychedelics, it's not always safe. And so we want to make sure to take care of that here in our own state.
Some of that will evolve in terms of what it's going to look like unfolding, but the idea is that it will be intensive, targeted training for psychedelic medicine. Because you know what? If you're a medical doctor, it doesn't mean you understand psychedelics. This is coming from a different side. Now, a lot of your training may be applicable, and that they may create a tiered approach where you don't have to do redundant training, but there's specific psychedelic training that will be needed.
It will be a part of the OHA. But they'll be private individuals. They won't be necessarily government employees.
Right.
So they're going to be professionals in this field that the OHA is charged with to bring together this advisory board. And then this advisory board will have all the wisdom that it takes to create, the risk assessment and to develop the board exam.
You don't need a qualifying condition to access the services, right? So they can't say, this is only going to be locked up in hospitals and it's only for these particular individuals. And that's pretty clearly stated in the language. We want this to be accessible. We want this to be safe. We don't want it locked away in hospitals. We don't want it overly restricted. But we don't want to do anything that's going to hurt anyone either. So we did everything we could in the language in that regard.